Good evening, and welcome to News Scope Daily TV, your trusted destination for in-depth analysis, verified information, and clear explanations of the global events shaping our world today. Tonight, we turn our focus to a developing crisis that is sending shockwaves through North America's agricultural heartland. A recent decision by Canada to raise potash export prices is triggering what many experts and farmers are now calling a historic crisis for U.S. agriculture. Beyond rising fertilizer costs, this issue is exposing deep economic vulnerabilities, geopolitical tensions, and growing political frustration among American farmers. For the first time in years, a significant number of U.S. farmers are openly pushing back, declaring that they will no longer tolerate political trade strategies that place their livelihoods at risk. What began as a price adjustment is quickly evolving into a broader debate about food security, trade dependence, and leadership accountability. What does this mean for farmers, consumers, and the future of U.S.-Canada relations? How could this crisis affect food prices, elections, and national stability? Tonight, News Scope Daily TV brings you a detailed, fact-based breakdown, cutting through the noise to reveal what's really at stake. Stay with us. The recent decision by Canada to raise the price of its potash exports has sent shockwaves across the United States agricultural sector, triggering what many farmers are now calling a historic crisis. Potash, a key ingredient in fertilizer essential for crop yields, sits at the heart of modern industrial farming. Any disruption to its supply or pricing directly affects food production, farm profitability, and ultimately consumer prices. As costs soar and margins collapse, frustration is rapidly turning into political anger. Across farming communities in the Midwest, Great Plains, and Corn Belt, a growing number of U.S. farmers are openly declaring that this time they will not tolerate former President Donald Trump's trade rhetoric, pressure tactics, or policy uncertainty, which many believe contributed to the fragile state of U.S.-Canada agricultural relations. This crisis is not unfolding in isolation. It is the result of years of trade dependence, political brinkmanship, and structural vulnerabilities within U.S. agriculture. Why potash matters. The backbone of U.S. agriculture, potash, primarily used to supply potassium to crops, is indispensable for improving crop yield and quality, enhancing drought resistance, strengthening plant disease resistance. The United States imports over 80% of its potash, and Canada is by far the dominant supplier, accounting for the vast majority of those imports. This dependence leaves American farmers highly exposed to pricing decisions made north of the border. When Canada adjusts potash export prices, U.S. farmers feel the impact almost immediately, often within a single planting season. Canada's price hike, strategic, economic, and political factors. Canadian producers and policymakers argue that the price increase is driven by rising production and transportation costs, global fertilizer market volatility, increased demand from emerging agricultural markets, the need to protect domestic economic interests. However, many U.S. farmers and analysts see the move as strategic leverage, especially in the context of ongoing trade tensions, the fragile legacy of past tariff wars, uncertainty surrounding future U.S. trade leadership. While Ottawa has not framed the decision as political retaliation, the timing has fueled suspicion across rural America. The immediate impact on U.S. farmers' exploding costs. Fertilizer already represents one of the largest expenses for farmers. The potash price hike has raised per-acre input costs significantly, forced farmers to cut back on fertilizer use, threatened crop yields for corn, wheat, soybeans, and barley, shrinking margins. With crop prices fluctuating and operational costs rising, many farmers report operating at or below break-even levels, increased reliance on loans and credit, delayed equipment purchases and farm investments. For small and mid-sized family farms, the pressure is existential. Political backlash. This time we will not tolerate Trump. Perhaps the most striking development is the political shift among U.S. farmers. During previous trade disputes, particularly under the Trump administration, farmers were urged to endure short-term pain for long-term gains. Many accepted this logic during tariff battles with China and trade confrontations with allies, including Canada. Today, that patience is gone. Farmers across multiple states are now saying, trade wars with allies are unacceptable. Political brinkmanship has real human costs. Agriculture cannot survive. Repeated policy shocks. For many, the potash crisis symbolizes a breaking point. They argue that America's closest trading partners should not be treated as economic adversaries, and that aggressive trade posturing only leaves farmers caught in the crossfire. A deeper structural problem in U.S. agriculture. Beyond politics, the crisis exposes deeper vulnerabilities: over-reliance on foreign fertilizer suppliers, lack of domestic potash production investment, insufficient strategic reserves for agricultural inputs. Experts warn that without structural reform, similar crises will recur, regardless of who occupies the White House. Food prices and national security implications. The impact of rising fertilizer costs does not stop at the farm gate. Economists warn of higher food prices for consumers, increased inflationary pressure, greater dependence on food imports. Some analysts now frame fertilizer security as a national security issue, arguing that food systems are as critical as energy supply chains. What comes next? Possible paths forward. Several options are under discussion. 1. Renewed diplomatic engagement with Canada to stabilize fertilizer trade. 2. Investment in domestic potash mining and processing. 3. Emergency support programs for farmers. 4. Long-term agricultural input diversification strategies. Farmers are demanding predictability, not political theater, a crisis that may redefine U.S. farm politics. Canada's potash price hike has done more than raise fertilizer costs. It has ignited a profound reckoning within U.S. agriculture. Farmers who once tolerated trade disruptions in the name of nationalism or political loyalty are now drawing firm lines. Their message is clear: food security cannot be a bargaining chip, and farming communities will no longer absorb the costs of geopolitical power games. As planting seasons approach and financial pressures mount, the outcome of this crisis may reshape not only agricultural policy, but the political landscape of rural America itself. Potash as a tool of strategic power. At its core, the potash crisis reveals an uncomfortable truth for Washington. Fertilizer is not just an agricultural input. It is a strategic commodity. Much like oil, gas, or rare earth minerals, potash sits at the intersection of economics, geopolitics, and national security. Canada's dominance in the global potash market gives it a form of structural leverage that does not require overt political statements or diplomatic confrontation. Simply adjusting prices within market mechanisms can reshape entire agricultural economies downstream. This quiet power stands in contrast to the more confrontational trade style favored by the Trump era: tariffs, public threats, and transactional diplomacy. Many U.S. farmers now recognize that power exercised silently is often more effective than power exercised loudly. The Trump factor: why farmers are drawing a line. Now, the growing resistance among U.S. farmers toward Donald Trump is not ideological, it is experiential. During Trump's presidency, farmers were repeatedly told to hold the line. Losses from trade wars were partially offset by subsidies. Long-term structural damage was downplayed. But subsidies do not replace market stability, and they do not restore trust with trading partners. Today's potash shock feels different because it comes from an ally, not an adversary. It directly affects the upcoming planting cycles. It cannot be neutralized quickly with bailout checks. Many farmers now view Trump's confrontational trade legacy as having weakened America's negotiating credibility, making it easier for partners to prioritize their own interest without fear of U.S. retaliation. In private farm association meetings and public forums alike, a new consensus is emerging. Agriculture cannot survive repeated political experimentation. Electoral consequences: a cracking of the rural political base. Rural America has long been considered a reliable political bloc. However, fertilizer inflation and market uncertainty are now reshaping voter psychology. Farmers are pragmatic by necessity. When costs rise unpredictably and policies feel impulsive, loyalty erodes. Political analysts warn that swing states with heavy agricultural economies could become less predictable. Rural voters may prioritize stability over rhetoric. Trade competence may outweigh cultural alignment. The potash crisis may not trigger an immediate political realignment, but it accelerates a trend already underway. Economic survival is overtaking ideological loyalty. Structural dependency: America's fertilizer vulnerability exposed. Perhaps the most damning aspect of the crisis is how clearly it exposes a strategic blind spot in U.S. policy. Despite being a global agricultural superpower, the United States lacks sufficient domestic potash production, has underinvested in fertilizer resilience, treats agricultural inputs as market issues rather than strategic assets. This dependency contradicts decades of rhetoric about self-sufficiency and national resilience. While energy independence became a priority after oil shocks, fertilizer independence never received similar attention. As a result, American farmers now bear the cost of decades of policy neglect. Canada's position, not retaliation, but rational self-interest. From Ottawa's perspective, the price hike is not an act of aggression, it is economic realism. Canada faces inflationary pressures, environmental regulations increasing extraction costs, global competition for fertilizer supplies. By prioritizing profitability and domestic economic health, Canada is behaving exactly as rational states do in an era of uncertainty. This underscores a harsh lesson for U.S. farmers. Allies act in their own interest first, especially when global supply chains are tight, food inflation and social stability risks. As fertilizer costs climb, food prices inevitably follow. This has broader consequences. Urban consumers face rising grocery bills. Inflation pressures complicate monetary policy. Social frustration grows as essentials become less affordable. In extreme scenarios, prolonged agricultural stress can feed political polarization, protests, and distrust in institutions. What begins as a potash price hike can ripple outward into social and political instability, a turning point for U.S. agricultural strategy. The crisis may ultimately force a reckoning. Policy circles are now discussing strategic fertilizer reserves, federal incentives for domestic mining, long-term supply agreements with Canada, depoliticization of agricultural trade. Farmers are demanding a seat at the table, not as symbolic supporters but as stakeholders whose livelihoods depend on competent governance. Beyond potash, a test of governance. This crisis is not only about fertilizer prices, it is a test of whether the United States can manage interdependence without confrontation, protect critical sectors from political volatility, learn from the unintended consequences of past trade policies. For U.S. farmers, the message is stark and urgent. They can no longer afford leaders who gamble with their survival. Canada's potash decision has illuminated a deeper truth. In the modern world, power belongs not just to those who speak the loudest, but to those who control the quiet foundations of the global economy. As we've seen, Canada's potash price hike is far more than an agricultural issue. It is a warning signal, one that highlights the fragile foundations of modern food systems, the risks of overdependence on strategic resources, and the real-world consequences of political decision-making. For U.S. farmers, this moment marks a turning point. Patience is wearing thin, trust has been shaken, and economic survival is now outweighing political loyalty. For policymakers, the message is unmistakable. Food security cannot be treated as an afterthought, nor can agriculture be sacrificed in geopolitical power games. And for consumers, the implications may soon reach grocery shelves, household budgets, and broader economic stability. At NewsScope Daily TV, our mission is to keep you informed, empowered, and ahead of the curve, because understanding global events is the first step toward making sense of the world around us. If you found this analysis valuable, please like this video, share it with others, and subscribe to NewsScope Daily TV so you never miss our in-depth reports, breaking news, and global investigations. Your support helps us continue delivering independent, high-quality journalism. Thank you for watching, stay informed, and we'll see you in our next report.